but we have a world of recordings now with technology. Anyway,
Right.
so here we go. 3, 2, 1. I don't know what they do with the clapboard, Welcome in anybody who is watching or listening to this. It is Cleats Off the Couch, another episode here with your host, Del Curry. And today we have a special guest, a friend, another friend. I know I say that like every episode now, but that's where it starts. You start with talking about these things with your friends and people you know, and maybe it builds from there. So having some conversation today about one of my least favorite topics right now in football today. In episode 12, I think it was, check it out. The top 5 reasons why the GOAT doesn't exist. So today, my friend here, he is a Tom Brady fan. He's followed him from New England down to the Buccaneers. He's at least honest about that, which I appreciate. Can't stand people who just all of a sudden start donning the apparel of the team because, I've always been a fan. No, he is not. He has not always been a fan of that team, but he has been a fan of Tom Brady. So I at least respect that. Welcome in, everybody. This is Aaron Gilmore. Welcome in, Aaron. Good to have you today.
Hey, over here. Good to see you.
So tell me a little bit. I mean, that's the place to start. I bring in such an introduction for you. I make you feel so special, like I really want you here. And and so tell me a little bit about how your interest first came into being, because I say you're a fan of Tom Brady. How did you first get connected into football with that? Was it because of Tom? Was it because of the Patriots and where you're living now, or what?
Yeah, so growing up, I used to watch my dad watch football a lot, and it was a kind of a way of him escaping of sorts. I tried sitting down with him for a couple of years, and again, this is before I even started getting into football, but mainly because I wanted to sit down with my dad and see what it was that excited him every week. And I could not get into the game. I didn't understand the plays. I didn't understand why so many people were on the team. I didn't understand why those people left, and then the defense came back on. I didn't understand what is special teams, and I immediately I thought at the time that special teams meant that they were abled, they were disabled. I really did, yes, because I was a kid. I was like, when we were looking at Special Olympics in that day. So he says, "Oh, this is special teams." It's like, oh, so I get, okay, so there's a place in football where you have not so abled people coming on to the field to shine. Okay, cool. It was that's how far my ignorance went.
One could argue
so
that's actually where different people actually became disabled. But anyway, that's a different conversation about special teams versus offense and defense. Anyway.
Rough the kicker for sure. Yeah, you get disabled immediately. But no, so that's how far. But that's just an illustration of how far my ignorance really went. And then we moved to Maine, and my now father-in-law was sitting down, and he was watching football with my dad, and it became a guy's day rather than just my dad alone. I was like, okay, so there's something to this. So I gave it an honest look. I sat down and started watching the game, and I was not afraid, although I was a little timid about asking questions in the midst of. So my dad was actually in one of the rarest moods, a teaching moment, and so I sat down. I said, okay, how many players are on the team and why? And so I asked questions, and I started really getting interested in, that's how the game's played, and then I found myself compelled to jump up and scream and celebrate when I started seeing, because I now know the rules of the game. And that kind of goes along with the conversation that I had with our youth about worldview, but that's a side note. It's but anyway, so I got into football watching in 2001. This is when I first started watching football, and I was in the living room in Maine. We moved to Maine, and of course, everyone in Maine are their Patriot fans. And I watched in 2001 as Bledsoe hit the field, and I saw how the game was being played, and it was really cool. And then at game 11, he got taken out, and Brady took the field. And the moment Brady took the field, Bledsoe saw the field, I think, one more time, and it was for a short period. Brady, from then on in, was the Patriot quarterback, and so I started becoming a fan, watching him. I started studying his moves, studying his character off the field, and I started becoming really attracted to the man Tom Brady more than, and not just the player himself. And players went to the Patriots over time, and I became fans of the various different players that played for the Patriots. But Brady was the only consistent in all of that, and it was really cool to see how he interacted with all the players that came into the team. So that's how I got started in football. That's how I got started with Brady.
Okay, so it was Brady. It wasn't with a team and then connected into Brady. Okay.
I was a
Okay.
Patriots fan. But really Brady was my biggest fandom.
Gotcha. And I don't want to take up too much of our time today because I know that you and I can get going crazy about this. I encourage anybody listening, if you haven't listened, I think it was episode 12 about the GOAT. Go check that out, give that a listen, and give me your feedback, give me your thoughts. I'm always open to hearing what other people think about it. But I feel like part of the reason why you were more okay with then following Brady after starting potentially as a New England fan who then really connected with this quarterback was, at least according to different conversations we've had, you're not as big a fan of Bill Belichick, it seems.
No, so yes and no. So Bill Belichick is a good coach. He is a good coach, but I was not a fan of a lot of the decisions that he made. Some of the things. So he micromanages, I think, a little too much,
Mm,
and so Brady and others, not just Brady himself. So this is not a I think Brady should have had his moment. What I'm saying is, there's a lot of members of the team that conveyed the same kind of frustration with this sort of inability to grow, this inability to really see what they were made of. And instead, what Belichick seems to do in his when it comes to his, especially with his offense, he gives them sort of limitations by having them follow rules. Like he kind of keeps them in a box, so to speak. Doesn't really let them kind of be creative and on their own. When Brady went to the Bucks, you saw a vast difference in coaching styles. Belichick was very micromanaging, but Arians, on the other hand, said, "Yep, go ahead, do what you want to do. See what you can come up with." And they tested it, and they went back and forth, and they ended up coming with a really really good offense that ended up winning the Super Bowl the first year after Brady had left the Patriots into that year. So the, I don't like I don't necessarily like Belichick's style of coaching because there's like I said, a limitation of character and a limitation of an ability for his team members to collaborate and partake into the team. They don't have the same kind of investment. And there's other decisions that came along with why I'm not really a fan of Belichick. I respect him greatly, but the final straw for me was when Brady did leave, and that decision that came, the reasons why that came. Brady wanted to retire with the Patriots, as we'll talk about here later on, because obviously there's new news on that. But Brady wanted to retire with the Patriots, and the rule, the common comment was, well, you're old. We don't know that you can actually stand longer than a year's to year contract, so we'll just go year by year. And Brady says, you know what, forget this. I've been taking pay cuts every year, just about every year. I've been coaching. I've been trying to get the right players on the team. I'm willing to make sacrifices. I've been doing that year in year out to get the right people on the team, which is one of the reasons why I think he's the GOAT, to be honest. Well, one of the reasons anyway. And he ended up leaving because they didn't seem to have the right kind of aptitude or what do you call it, appraisal of his real potential.
mm.
So they let him go because it's a business, and I get it. From a business standpoint, it makes total sense. But from a character standpoint, and even Kraft said the same thing, is this may not have been the right decision to make, and so Brady left for obvious reasons, and we'll talk about this later on. But he might be going back, he might not be. We don't know yet, but
I
so Bill,
actually, we will have to talk about this because I'll be honest with you, I have not seen this news that you speak of. So, and I'm not sure for those listening to this, we're recording this beginning of December. This may be coming out more around Christmas time or right at the beginning of the new year. So,
yes.
when others are hearing this, so who knows what could happen by then? But it's funny. It's really funny to hear perspective from different people because I'm somebody who some of the things that you said are actually reasons why I appreciate what happened with the New England franchise and with different things there. I'm looking at it from a coaching perspective and some other different pieces. And so like I appreciate some of the things that you didn't really appreciate, which is really interesting to be able to hear because for me there's some pieces from the coach and from the GM and from the front office that are so important. And same with the Buccaneers is that I it really does annoy me when people don't take into consideration the fullness of what it looks like to take a team to win a Super Bowl. My one buddy says it very, very well in the way that he really believes there's really three or four pieces that have to be in place to be able to win a Super Bowl. You have to have a good coach. You have to have a great front office. You have to have a great front office to put those pieces together. You have to have a good defense, and you have to have a good quarterback. Like
Yeah.
those are like the pieces. And if you're missing one of those, it's really hard, not impossible, right? But it's really hard to win a Super Bowl. And one of the things I think, and I kept saying this all that year I shouldn't say all that year, the second half of that season, as you really saw, because I would argue that Bruce Arians actually, how he handled things with how he ran his offense was trash the first 7 weeks of that year. And you can go back and see, because the way that Tom had been shaped, again, and this is part of my argument for why I think Bill was so good and helped to shape Tom into who he has become, is because he saw the formula that was necessary to help shape him into who he needed to be, with a certain style of system that allowed, like, in 3 seconds he's there, in 2 seconds he's crossing from here to here, like being able to identify those pieces to then strategize against what the defense is doing or going to be doing, where it was so key. When he went to Arians' offense, it was Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, and just throw in my general area and we'll see what happens. Like, it was so undisciplined. And then we saw, coming out of the bye week that year, we saw a completely different offense, because we saw the disciplined offense and the disciplined feel that we had experienced for so many years in New England. And so I see a culmination from the two of them that then took place then because it works. Like, that's nothing against Tom. It's nothing against Bill. It worked. It won how many Super Bowls? You know what I mean? So
Right.
with that,
I agree. No, I agree with what you're saying there. So there's a couple things I want to address with what you just said, though. So because you're right, Brady did not just take himself. No one. I was never claiming, and I never will claim, that Brady made it himself. Like, he didn't get there by himself. Belichick gave him a lot of great tools and discipline. I agree with you that while Belichick does tend to micromanage his team, he also highly disciplines them. I mean, it's one of the most disciplined teams that I know of in the NFL. It's quite a feat to watch. And you're right. When he did go to the Bucs, I agree that there was a lack of discipline, and just throw to my general area thing. So Brady was able to bring that into the team that they probably never had experienced before. But I do take a small issue with the idea that Belichick made Brady who he is as well. And I know that's not necessarily what you said at its extension. But if that were true, then how would we explain Mac Jones? Brady was on the team maybe, a year, maybe 2 years before Belichick put him on the field. And then Brady, I mean, the rest is history. 19 years. But he's had Mac Jones for how long? So Mac Jones doesn't have what Brady had. So Belichick can't use Mac Jones the way that he used Brady. Right? So I think there's kind of a catch-22. You need both of them. Yes. And the reason why Brady was that is one of those GOATs is because he was usable by Belichick's standards and methods. Mac Jones doesn't seem to be.
Yeah, right? I would agree that I think a better term in my quick shoot through that statement it would be to say shaped. He helped to shape Brady, because you see who Brady was when he came out of Michigan, and you see how he helped to shape him into who he is. Now, obviously, you have to have some of those intangibles and some of those pieces to be shaped, right? You have to be made of clay to be shaped into a clay pot, right? So right. Like I agree, and I think some of those was from, just for a quick statement, me shooting through that thought.
My fear was that you may have been extending it, saying, "Well, Belichick made Tom Brady who he was."
No. And so, like, I, as a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, like, I despised playing against Tom Brady and the Patriots. I despised it because it would be terrible every stinking time. And then when it actually looked like it went in the Steelers' favor, we're not going to argue about this, but the refs would be on their side. So let's move forward. But Jesse James caught the ball. But anyway, so with that,
you just slip that in, man.
Jesse James caught the ball. That's all I'm saying.
Go ahead.
The goal line was extended past the ball. What happens after that does not matter.
Show. I'm not going to argue it. It's your show. It's okay.
Maybe I want you to argue. No, just kidding. About necessary
that's
things.
A longer conversation.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's gonna take up way too much time if we do. But Jesse James caught the ball. So,
no, we didn't. But go ahead, keep going.
Oh man, but with that, I I think that what we then saw begin to happen down there was we saw that culture on offense, but the thing that nobody wants to talk about, because let's be real, the news cycle, the thing that grabs the most attention and builds the most support and builds the most everything is Tom Brady, right? Tom Brady succeeded in this.
Yes.
And so when it came to the Buccaneers, I think nobody wants to talk about how insane that defense was.
No, that's true.
That defense is so good. Listen, offense scores points. Having a great quarterback helps you score points, but your defense wins championships.
No, my fandom to Tom Brady is not blind. It's not to say that he makes this team. He's the one that brings everybody to victory. You're absolutely right. There is a lot, but while he has nothing to do with the defense, right? There is a contribution that is being made in the team from all standards, from all players, right? I mean, the best thing to say is you're right. I mean, because it's not just Tom Brady that made this happen. The Patriots had an immaculate defense about mid-season, mid-career, mid Tom Brady's career, I should say. And you saw it, and they're the ones that actually made it happen. Brady was not doing good those years. In fact, he even admits the same thing. If you ever watched, so Disney Plus came out with not The Man, the Legend, I forget what it's called, but it's basically a 9-episode series documentary that follows Brady from game 1 of his career in game 11 of 2001 all the way through to 2021, I think it was. And it talks about here's my high points, here are my low points, and back about between 2010, 2012, give or take. I forget the actual years off the top of my head, but he was saying, I didn't win this. The defense did. The defense was the one that, and he gives full credit to. I mean, so even the characters right there, you're absolutely right. There were years that Brady did bad, and they still won because it had nothing to do with Brady.
Yeah, I mean, I personally would argue even back to like 2000, which years was it 2004 and such, that those early 2 Super Bowls. If you look, the defense performed highly, and Adam Vinatieri won the games. Adam Vinatieri and the defense.
Yes,
and
I know. So I was stationed in Korea, and it was 2006, and I was stationed in Korea, and it ticked me off because we had just traded Vinatieri off.
Oh yeah,
So,
I mean, arguably before Justin Tucker,
and then
right?
we lost
Arguably,
the Super Bowl to Vinatieri.
yeah.
So I get it.
So I mean, and that's some of the stuff. But again, that's not void of the reality that a quarterback and an offense is necessary in order to be able to get to that point. But as a Steelers fan this year, I can point out and tell you it doesn't matter how good your defense is if your offense doesn't freaking put points on the board.
It's true.
If your offense doesn't move the ball down the field. Oh,
but Vinatieri did not make a kick from a 0-0 scoreboard, right? So Brady had to at least keep up with the defense of the opposing team in order for Vinatieri to even have a chance to make a field goal. Because if it's a 3-point difference that it allows you to be able to win, if a 3-pointer is what's going to make a difference between a win or a loss, Brady had to have done something to get them to that point. Really, the offense in general, to get them to that point where Vinatieri would have had a chance to win the game for the team.
Not necessarily. And hear me on this. I say this from experiencing this even during this high school football season as a high school coach, because our defense many times had turnovers and scored points, and our offense didn't do squat, and we still won the game.
Okay.
And so that's what I'm not saying that's exactly what happened, but I'm saying I remember the defense being really good and putting them in great and even some greats from the from the thousands and such. So that's all I'm saying.
I do remember there were a lot of pick sixes in that season. So I get it.
Yeah.
You're
So
right.
anyway, and that maybe some of this bias comes more nowadays from the fact that I've been coaching a lot of defense it's at the high school level. I'm not trying to compare similarities between coaching at the high school level versus the NFL, but my mind has become so much more aware and appreciative of defense. And so that other year, just a few years ago, with the Rams and the Patriots in the Super Bowl, everybody's just like, oh my goodness, this was such a terrible Super Bowl and stuff. Well, I mean, that was mainly argued because the Saints should have been in, right? Because that no call in the NFC Championship game where the receiver got completely destroyed before the ball got caught between the Rams and the Saints.
Yes.
And so, but anyway, I really appreciated that game. and I appreciate it more now thinking back to it because of how much it showed us about defense in the NFL. Yeah, it was only like what 13-10 or something, something like that, but we got to see defense matter again. And actually, if you look at the statistics, like over the past 2 years, but especially this year, we're seeing like the average offense has dropped a full touchdown scored on average per game because of how much better defenses are doing. Like when you look at the average offense in the NFL and how much they're scoring per game, the point value is almost a full touchdown from 2 years ago.
Wow. That's good.
So it is really good. It is good. And everybody wants to see points. And don't get me wrong, I love seeing great offensive plays, but come on, let's see some great defensive plays. And if we can't see them in the hit categories anymore because of the rules and the changes of player safety and stuff, now we're seeing heightened athleticism on defense that is completely that's why the edge rushers are so huge now, because the way in which they're doing things, not that they weren't before, but they were big before because they also had the hit aspect and the power aspect, and now there's such a movement and athleticism necessary off the edge, as well as, you got to have 5 DBs who can play good ball because the athleticism of the guys on offense. So the game now, and that, back to episode 12, top 5 reasons why the GOAT doesn't exist is because, one of the reasons that I had in that was because the game evolves. It evolves so much and has evolved so much. You can say this about any sport, and I do say this about every sport. And so when you look at when you look at that as one of the things to take into account as to why you can't just generally say that one person is the greatest of all time, it's because all time is to take every evolved aspect of the game and put it right side by side with each other, and you can't do that. You can't necessarily.
Well, no, and I highly disagree with that. So the GOAT term was first coined in 1992, and it was, in fact, I have it right here. It was first coined in 1992 when Lonnie Ali, Muhammad Ali's wife, incorporated Greatest of All Time Incorporated to consolidate her license and her husband's intellectual properties and commercial purposes. And if you know anything about Muhammad Ali, is he the greatest of all time? Would you consider him in boxing to be the greatest of all time?
I'm just going to be straightforward with you. I don't know enough about boxing.
Oh, okay.
I don't know enough about boxing.
So the reason why it's considerable is because there's a lot of different variables you have to take into account. Number one is the season in which that particular player is playing, because they're dealing with a certain set of rules that other players today probably would not be playing with, right? Mm-hmm. So boxing has changed, and boxing rules have changed, and so on. And just like football, the rules have changed. When Brady first came on, if I remember correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, it was about 12 games. Now it's, 16? So there's a difference in game, the amount of games per season. So obviously, if he says, there's most passing touchdowns in a season. Yeah, but you have 4 extra games in your season that you can work with, right? So there are some changes in there. So when we say greatest of all time, in a lot of ways, you have to say, okay, which year are you speaking of, right? Greatest of all time with the circumstances and variables that existed at the time that you were playing. So there are differences there. And then you also have to take into account, what position did you play? Are you the greatest of all time in that position, or greatest of all time football player in general? In which case, you're absolutely right. You can't make that statement because you didn't play DB. You didn't play cornerback. You didn't play, right? You're quarterback. You played a specific role, right? So you could say, Jerry Rice might have been the greatest of all time wide receiver at the time that he played. But Tom Brady would have been the greatest of all time quarterback at the time that he played, right?
What I absolutely
it depends
love
on the variables you're including in the definition.
What I absolutely love is as you actually put logical definition behind things, you're actually supporting my argument in that video. I'm just saying.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, you think so?
Oh, I 100%, because these are some of the things I argued. Is that is if you actually contemplate what you're saying when you say the greatest of all time, it cannot be stated. But if you want greatest of their time, yes, and that's basically that's basically what you just said.
But no, that's not what I said. Because so in philosophy, you're looking at when you have a definition of a time. For instance, the word gentleman back in the day used to mean a man who owns land, right? Today, if you say gentleman, it simply means nice guy, right? So when I say you're a gentleman,
that's debatable. But
well, fair enough. You can define how.
I know that's not your point. That's not your point.
But the point is that gentleman no longer means a man who owns land, right? Mm. You could be a scoundrel, a thief, a murderer, but if you own land, you're a gentleman, according to historical purposes, right? The etymology of the word. So when I say, well, you're a gentleman, I have to be very clear. What do you mean by gentleman? What form of definition are you using, right? And so when we say all time, well, that depends. You're a gentleman of all time. Well, again, but what do you mean by gentleman? You're a man who owns land, right? So when I say of all time, it's not saying that for all definitions that have existed throughout time, you are this person. It means of the definition that existed at that time, you are of all time that particular definition of whatever definition we're using of GOAT. So in this case, GOAT of, let's say, 2001, 12 games in a season. The first, you came in game 11 and you saw a huge difference in the way that the team played. As an example, you can bring up the fact that he has, more Super Bowl rings than the Steelers team, right? And you could call
as many.
No, hold on, wait.
As many.
No.
He has 6.
Steelers, hold on, wait. I looked this up. Hold on, wait.
The Steelers have 6. We were the first team to have 6.
Right?
Brady didn't get 7, did he?
I know people are probably laughing. He's like, he's a Tom Brady fan. He should know this.
But now I'm second guessing myself. I know the Steelers have 6.
Yeah,
I know that for sure. But I just can't remember. Does Brady have 7 now?
There it is. I thought it was 7.
I thought it was
7.
Oh, and he does have 7.
Yeah, geez. You got me questioning for a minute. I was like, wait, I know this.
Okay, it was
he has
6 with the Patriots.
Yeah, 6 with the Patriots, but then 1 with the Bucs. But yeah, so he has more Super Bowl rings than any NFL team already, automatically, and that doesn't matter how many games are in a season. By the way, already that's a big difference. And so you can say as an example, okay, well, something's different with that. Was he a part of the right teams at the right time? I'm sure somebody like you might claim that, but then we go back to what did he do in order for that to happen? I mean, he's a pretty central part of the team to be a quarterback. So it goes back to how are you defining the term? And if you apply that term across the board, does he still end up becoming the top of that list? If so, it doesn't matter who it is, by the way, then I would say, yeah, you're a GOAT. Muhammad Ali, you're the GOAT for the definition and the circumstances and variables that existed at your time. If you applied that across the board, there's nobody like you.
Mm-hmm. Well, and again, you believe it or not, you are supporting what I had said in that. And so
not at all.
No, listen to me. So I had emphasized in that the public, if you were to say to the general public the word GOAT, you were to say the word GOAT, what do people think of? Literally the greatest player in football of all time. When somebody says Tom Brady's the GOAT, that's what the general public thinks of. If you were to sit and define terms and stuff, I agree with you 100%. And that's what I say. And the thing is if you were to take it, if you were to take it and you were to say the greatest quarterback of his time means the GOAT, then yes, Tom Brady is that because he is the greatest player. He is the greatest quarterback of his time. You're defining certain things that allow oh my goodness, that allow that give feasibility to the actual terms. Whereas so we were saying the same thing.
We're not, but your
similar thing.
Conclusion,
I'll say it like that.
But your conclusion, according to what you said, was that he's not the GOAT. Therefore, and I'm saying, well, no, he still is the GOAT, based on the definition that we're portraying. We agree with the methodology that gets to our conclusion that, and I concede that point. You're absolutely right. We concede that there's no GOAT in the way that society is defining GOAT.
Mm-hmm. And that's
there's no such thing as football.
That's the focus of that episode.
And if that's the case, then so be it. But to conclude also that there is no GOAT, right, is just as fallacious.
See, I disagree, and hear me out on this.
Depends on how you find it.
Hear me out on this, because one of the things I emphasize in that video too is you have to define what you mean by success, because to state that somebody is the greatest of all time means that we have a similar understanding of what is success. So you already said that you pointed out the fact of 7 rings. Well, why do rings define? Because if you're looking at an individual in a team game, you have to look at far more than how many rings they have. You have to look at what they're able to apply, because if you look at the capability of a certain player, for example, Dan Marino could be argued as the greatest quarterback of all time because of what he was able to do. But if you were to say to the general public, and you have to remember too that a lot of my conversation with this is to general football fans, right? Like, when you say the word GOAT, what comes to your mind, and then addressing that. It's not necessarily let's define down exactly what this would look like. But with the Dan Marino piece, if I were to claim and really look at the pieces of, you have to define what you mean by success and what you're able to, okay, so what is that player able to actually achieve in the time that they play? Dan Marino should be in the conversation greatest all time, but instantly people would smack me across the face because Dan Marino never won any Super Bowls. I don't care. Still, what he was able to achieve as a quarterback in the time that he played with the players that he had around him on the team and the injuries that were suffered. And you could go into any detail about this. You could go into every little detail if you wanted to, which we can't. And one of the things I concede in that is I was not alive when well, I can't say that because I was at the tail end, but anyway, so anyway, with that, you have this generalized understanding of when I say GOAT, yes, what you said about 1992, Muhammad Ali, the thing about the meaning behind GOAT, I would agree with, okay, that gives me comprehension as to what that term means. But what you said earlier about etymology, it is 20 years, no, it is 30 years later. It is 30 years later. So now when you say GOAT, that's not what people think about. When you say GOAT, people think literally this player right here, he is the greatest person to play football. And what is the reasoning? The number one reasoning is because he has 7 rings. And it's just like, but you're not taking, I'm saying generality.
Generally,
People throw comments at me on Twitter, like DM me. I want to hear more from other people like this. I don't want to put words in people's mouth, but I'm just sharing from my experience, from listening to sports shows, from listening to other people's conversations across different states lines, not just, here in my little town, but people when they talk about Tom Brady as the GOAT, they literally mean he is the greatest. You could put him in any time of any era, and he would be the greatest quarterback of all time. And that's not true. That's not true.
What you just did, though, was that you diminished your own platform. So you started getting into the philosophical conversation about what success is, right? And by doing so, you actually made an existential argument that diminished even success existing. So the moment you said, well, it depends on how you define success. Why should 7 Super Bowl rings define success? Why should the many different records that he's broken? How should that define success? Excuse me. So when you diminish the qualities that are taken in order to define success, so that there's no qualities anyone could really agree upon, right? So that, then technically speaking, objectively speaking, there would be no such thing as success. A team losing a game would be just as successful to one person as one person winning 7 Super Bowl rings. In which case, why even talk about football in the first place? Because what you just did was you just destroyed the entire argument of even discussing this in the first place. There's no such thing as success. And now we entered into an existential argument, which was not the point of this conversation.
The
point was, how is each individual defining GOAT? Because that will determine the success, I'll put the word success, of a conversation to be had.
No, I don't believe I did take away the meaning of success. What I said was that the reason that people give for what success is, what people define as success today, is not what success is. Success, I did say that success is what a player was able to do at their position in their time. So I didn't say that success didn't exist. I didn't diminish the fact that success existed. What I did say is that what people understand as success is not what the proper understanding of success is when we're talking about somebody being the greatest at what they do.
No, when I said that,
especially when we're talking about,
it's the logical conclusion. If there's no definition for what success should be except for a subjective definition, well, everyone's going to have a different subjective definition of what it is. I mean, objectively, that means that there's no such thing as success. It's all subjectively defined. Is that true?
I would agree in the case that everybody, if people defined success as a subjective thing according to what they according to what they think, yes, that can't hold, because then there's no objective understanding of success. What I'm saying is the objective understanding of success is what the individual performs and does in their time with their team for their position that is what shows us what success is. When somebody sets records that holds place for 30 years in a time when they didn't throw the ball the same way, when they didn't do the things the same way, that to me shows success of a player in that position. When somebody does the same level of things or just barely beats it, when they've been doing, you said 12 to 16 games and they've had so much more, all those kind of things, like, it doesn't mean that they're not a bad player. It doesn't mean that they're not successful, but they were not as successful as that other player when you consider their time, when you consider. So that's what I'm saying. I'm showing what I believe is the objective understanding of success. And what we have
But you subjectively defined it.
it's not based upon how I feel. Like, it's not based upon what I objectively, when you look at how somebody performs in
Right.
their position and what they achieve with specifics to that position and how that affects the team, that defines how they are successful.
But you subjectively define that. What if I said I disagreed? And I say success is not built upon that at all. I think success is different.
What does that
This is a longer conversation.
Well, yeah, but I don't see how that would change what is actually true. It's just
Right,
your
but
opinion that what is true is wrong.
Right, but why would your opinion be more elevated? Why should it be more promoted than my opinion?
Well, because
This is a longer conversation.
Well, no, because if you define success, that's what I mean. If you define success, that's what I'm going off of a like success. If you look, why did it do succession? That's different. That's a different thing.
That's a different topic.
We're not talking about Mac Jones. Anyway, the
Nice segue.
The good. I mean, there's a couple, and we don't have time to look at the history behind those.
No, we don't. We don't because well, it's interesting because it's part of the topic that you wanted to discuss anyway. But when it comes to success, I mean, is having a family, does that mean you're successful? Having a job, does that mean you're successful? Having a certain amount of money, does that mean you're successful? Right?
Well, I think
being able to acclimate to your surroundings, is that successful? Right?
They're dependent upon the topic and the subject of which you're looking for success. So for us to be talking about football and then to say, like, is the fact that this player is married mean that they're successful? Well, that has no bearings on the success of being a football player.
Right. But do you see how quickly it was easy to say, well, success should be defined as, and you fill in the blank of whatever quality that might be. So I could be successful if I lose a game because my intent, just placating here for a minute, if I know a player on the other side is dealing with some issues and he really needs this win to be encouraged, and I throw the game, I'm not saying this ever happened in the NFL. I'm saying, but if I throw the game for the other person, am I being successful from a character perspective?
We're not talking about character. We're talking about football.
Right, but the point is that the success is defined differently depending on who you're talking to. Like, for instance, someone could say, I think it's successful that you're on a team that you contributed to the fact that now your team made 7 Super Bowls. That's awesome. That's a big deal. No other player has ever done that. So that's something that sets you apart from everybody else. That could be a definition, a quality that somebody might use as defining. That's one of the reasons why now if they say that that's the only reason why he's the GOAT, I probably would take issue with that. But if that was one of the reasons, yeah, that's a viable reason why somebody should be considered a GOAT.
I think it's a viable I think it's a viable reason why somebody can be considered successful.
Okay. So then, yeah, so it's terminology then. Okay.
There's a part that we're not like, I think I'm trying to communicate that I don't think you're grasping, or that you're trying to communicate that I'm not grasping, and I think we're gonna end up continuing to beat a dead horse.
This is why we're friends, man.
Yeah, because like I mean, to end my thought with that, just so we can make sure that we cover some other conversation pieces, but is for me, when you look at any individual topic and such, I think the idea of success is an objective thing, in the way of success is it's the attempt to achieve, and specifically when we're talking about success in the topic of being a GOAT in football, being the greatest of all time in football, in my thought, and in what you defined for yourself as well, the greatest player of their position in their time, right? Being the definition of GOAT.
Yes.
Then what you're looking at for success is the attempt or achievement, the aim or attempt to achieve the highest of opportunity, the highest of levels, the highest of, I don't want to use
Mhm.
achievement again, but within what you are doing specific to that. So your character in that situation is not a part of that success. Like
No, it's
you
not.
can you
I
can
agree.
be you can be the most immoral person but still be the greatest football player of your position of your time. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
you could still be an Ndamukong Suh and be a dominant defensive lineman but still be a piece of trash. Like it's
right.
just so that's what I'm saying. Like for me, I'm looking at black and white like this is the tunnel vision of understanding success, and that is an objective thing that you can use across any subjective topic.
Yeah.
Anything you want. That's I think that's what I'm trying to
And I
portray.
I agree with that. But and I totally agree with that definition. My only stipulation was that the end of that tunnel, the destination that each person tries to achieve, each person is going towards, that destination is different for every person,
Mhm.
right? And so therefore there's no subjective definition of success. Even though I agree with the tunnel vision idea that you presented, that totally makes sense. Success is being able to achieve whatever end you're trying to achieve. But whatever you're trying to achieve is going to be different for each person, and that's where it becomes slippery to be able to
Well,
define.
and I think that's part of my argument in that video is understanding that there are like when you look at the end of the tunnel, it's not just whatever I choose or you think
Yeah,
or whatever. It's
yeah,
literally
yeah,
based
yeah.
upon no, as a quarterback, if I'm going to be the greatest quarterback of all time or of my time and therefore fulfill this idea of being the GOAT, I was able to do the most and complete the most as this position. Well, it has to be
Right.
pertinent to that position. It has to do
Agreed.
with how smart I was, how I led, how many, what my completions, how much yardage I gained, how many touchdowns, how what I was able to do, all those things. Having a ring comes into that play, but I don't think it eliminates and discounts what somebody else was able to do with those other things. And so that's what I'm saying is like specific to the position, there's obvious markers of what it looks like
Mhm,
to be a good quarterback. That's what I'm
mhm.
looking to.
I
And
absolutely agree,
and so
and you
what
actually
I'm
made my argument for me.
and what I'm trying I guess what I'm trying to do consistently in this when people
Yep.
talk about this is get them to think like stop thinking about what you feel about this guy and like, oh my goodness, he was able to do this.
Agreed.
Okay, that's cool, he was able to do that, but think about the details of this, and nobody thinks that way. Nobody thinks that way, and
No,
I
no,
say
no, I agree.
I
I
say that
absolutely
because
agree.
to get people to actually think through an itemized list of understanding and comprehending why a certain player or what you're actually arguing when you say GOAT versus when I say GOAT and what you're actually meaning by the success of a certain player and stuff like that. Like that's too much headspace for a lot of people. And I
Yes.
get that, and I have to
Too
constantly
much
like
to do. Fair enough.
but for people to flippantly then be like, oh, he's the GOAT, it's just like, do you even understand what you're saying? Do you
That's
comprehend?
fair.
Do you
If you wanna
comprehend?
send me that link to the article, and I'll read it after this is over.
Huh. Oh, it was
I haven't read it.
what article are you talking about?
The article you talked about with, week 12, I think it was?
No. I'm talking about a previous episode that I recorded talking about the
Oh,
top 5 reasons. It's like episode 12 of the podcast, episode 13
okay,
is what
yeah,
it is.
I'll look at it.
Okay. So, I don't remember a lot of it. It was one of those ones that I kind of rambled about it because I've talked about it a lot, and I kind of just threw it out there, and I was just like, wow, this kind of falls into place of just basically five. I don't say number 1 this, number 2 this, but you can hear as you go through like, oh wow, there's
Yeah,
like 5 main things that point out and stuff like
okay,
that. So
yeah.
anyway, I didn't get into it as philosophically as we just did, because I don't think that's what the general public does.
No, I agree,
And
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 I
so
apologize. It
and
probably went too
no,
deep.
no, 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 no. I enjoy it, and I think part of anybody listening to a podcast is knowing that if they listened and heard not despise, but if they heard that I was like, I hate that I'm doing this episode right now. If they heard that in my voice, I don't think that, I think part of the reason people listen to different episodes is because they can tell that somebody genuinely enjoys what they're doing and talking about. And that's,
Right.
like, and for me, like sometimes it's just like, I know what I want to say. I know what I'm thinking, but I may not be able to clearly get it out. And sometimes I enter this
Yeah,
place of like the 70-year-old who told the same story all their life and is forgetting pieces and just getting angry because they know the story, but they can't communicate it. That's how I feel when I get these certain thoughts. And it's just like, okay, no, I see
yeah.
what you're saying. And no, that's not what I meant. Like, how do I get this out? So that's where I find myself, and so that's why I appreciate conversations with yourself, because I know that how you process through and think through, it helps me to realize, well, no, okay, yes, like I agreed that, but I want you to understand what I was trying to say because I didn't communicate it right,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. It helps me to better verbalize and,
So,
and actually
in,
communicate
in
certain
your
things.
defense, that was a part of the topic that was not really prepped for on either side. So I
That's very
totally
true.
get it.
No, that's very true. Maybe a lot of that'll be bonus stuff. I don't know, but but I should probably check right now. Are you still good with with a
I'm
little
still
bit of
good.
time? Okay, all right. I just want to make
Yeah,
sure because we spent a lot of time on that, and I'm happy we
yeah,
did.
we
It's
did. We did.
because instead of me having a 20-minute episode, it was only like a 20-minute episode, like episode 12, so it's also short listening. But
Oh, good.
um, but instead of it just being me on the mic talking about my thoughts, it's nice to be able to get feedback and thought back. Like, no, I disagree with that. I would have did. Oh well. What about this? And well, no, this is what I meant. And oh, it's nice. It's really nice.
No, I really do appreciate those. I say the word conflict. That's probably too strong of a word, but in definition, I like those kinds of conflict because there's an old Sun Tzu quote. You don't know your enemy until you fight them,
Mm.
right? And so and not that you're an enemy, but that the point is that you really get to know somebody in conflict, right? You get to know them because anyone puts a face out, but in conflict you get to be able to see what are your true intentions, what are your true behavior and mannerisms, and what are your true beliefs, what are your true desires, right? And it allows you to get closer, and then in the conflict, if you do it right, it actually presents a safety like
Mm.
what we just did today, just now. It presents a safety that, yeah, you know what? I can be vulnerable. I can be raw. And here's who I truly, it actually, I think it grows that friendship in ways that I really don't think that we're seeing today often.
Mm.
So I appreciate conversations like that with you as well.
No, because I can hit this little red button right here on my screen, instead of actually having difficult conversation, right? All
Right,
right. Well, that
right,
was enough of him today. No,
right.
but
Never inviting him back.
yeah, no, but that's good stuff. I appreciate that, and so a lot about Tom. But
Yes.
it's actually good conversation too, because I know that you have been more of a Tom fan than a
Yeah.
team fan, and a lot of what we've talked about has had to deal with different teams on this episode, people who have been
Yes.
guests. So no, that's been a cool thing, and it actually, taking that forward, not as much talking about the current Bucks, although I will probably towards the end, I probably will grab a couple thoughts from you about that, but um looking at, there's been a lot around Tom. We talked a lot about the GOAT, and so has the news cycle for how many years now, and everybody has covered that. And in fact, I felt like there was a lot of different things that have happened over the past year in his life that has been privy to, stuff that has been made public that wasn't privy to be public at first, but then because of that, I feel like he was forced to make a public thing. Um, but anyway, a lot happening with Tom, and I think it's really important and pertinent to conversation when we're talking about this guy who's been polarized as the greatest quarterback of all time, the greatest of all time. We're not going more on the definitions, but I'll just use that phrase even though I may not agree with it,
Yeah.
just for simplicity's
That's good.
sake.
That's good.
But as the GOAT, he's been identified and polarized in such a way, publicized in such a way that when it came to different things that we've seen recently, different family issues, different unfortunate I say unfortunate, I'm not a fan. I've never been a fan of Tom Brady, but to me, I know what marriage is, and I hold it
Yeah.
near and dear to my heart, and it's a big part of who I'm a husband. I'm a dad within being a husband, and to see someone in the public sphere get treated a certain way, and to see what's happening, treated a certain way is also its own conversation, but
Yeah.
to see what's happening there, it's disheartening.
It
um
is.
I don't know if,
It is.
I mean, I know we had talked a little bit about it when we had kind of planned for this episode, and obviously the plan doesn't mean anything, but uh but
Sorry.
what are some thoughts? I know we had talked about this idea, and for anybody listening, there's a general idea that we all deal with, especially as men, but as general human beings, which is a family work life balance. And
Yeah.
that we think is something that we've seen the fruit of, good or bad. We've seen the fruit come about from the past 2 decades of Tom Brady to now. We've seen
Yeah.
the fruit take place, and and so work-life balance. That's a important topic for each and every person, and I want to kind of put it out there on how do you feel like this idea of family and work has really affected Tom?
Yeah. After we did our planning, I talked to a couple friends of mine about what we were doing with Cleats Off the Couch, um, and I told them what my theory was, and one of my friends gave me an article. I never read People magazine, so I would never have seen this article at all. But there was an article that came out in the later of October, and it almost verbatim said exactly what I said to you
Mm,
during our prep. And it brought it, but it had far more quotes from the parties that be. Tom, when he was Tom said that when he was 25, he says I used to think football and football only,
mm-hmm,
and then I started having kids, and then I started having a problem with prioritizing that family unit because when you have kids, you can't just stop playing football, right? And so there's this prioritization of which one do I care about most. Now, in the off season, right? He had 6 months he could spend with his family and spend with his kids, and not very many dads can really say that, right?
yeah,
Where they could spend 6 full months with their that's an amazing feat. But then for 6 months gone, Tom Brady got reamed for comparing his career with the military.
with the military, yeah.
But I don't know that that's necessarily a wrong way of thinking in certain areas. And I'm saying this as an Army vet, by the way, because for 6 months, he has to pay special attention to only football, whether that be football training or whether that be the football games themselves, his family life. And Giselle, his ex-wife, said the exact same thing, that this is what they had to deal with. For 6 months, it was football, football, football. And then the off season, it was his kids and then football training. He was preparing for the next season. And she's like, at what point are you going to sit down and be a dad?
Mm,
Right. And he said this on a couple. In fact, I have the article up, but he said this on a couple of. So he has the podcast Let's Go, and he was on the Howard Stern show saying the same thing. Giselle was finally getting at him for not being the dad. So his work life and his family life were constant tension.
mm-hmm,
And then he announced that he was going to retire. And for once, Giselle started seeing this hope. Okay, so now there's this. Okay, so now you're going to really focus on. And then shortly thereafter, less than a month, he says, "I'm coming right back," and that really sparked some major tensions. And so, for Tom, it seemed like that there was this my glory days, my identity is found within football, but I want my family as well. And he said this multiple times. That his identity, his passions were between family and football. And I couldn't help but say, you're right. A lot of us men, we deal with the very same thing. We
mm-hmm.
end up with which one should I value the most, and not value per se, but which one should I invest in the most? Because wherever you put your money, wherever you put your investment, truly shows you how you value where your value is,
And whatever you
um,
sacrifice.
and whatever you're willing to sacrifice. Exactly. And so it's not obvious to me that we men have that under wraps, that we understand exactly in the moment that it's happening which is most important. It's like the quote I mentioned I said to you a minute ago, where you know someone when you fight them, right? That this conflict. It's almost like there was no real tension nor conflict to really discover which one mattered most. And this is where I started my fandom started diminishing with Tom a little bit, because I feel he chose
Mm,
the wrong side. I feel he chose, if football is that meaningful that you're willing to lose your family in the process. Again, that conflict showed what you truly value, and what you valued was not the right thing.
mm-hmm.
Your family should have come first, in my opinion. Um,
So if you
but
want,
we all deal with it.
and if I can interject, I mean that goes back to, I think, a little piece of our fun little argument earlier, that the piece of
Yep.
morality and the piece of the ethics and different things like that have play in what you were comprehending with success, and the
Yes,
understanding of their
exactly.
fandom of Tom Brady and his success. Like the fact that there's this moral piece, and I guess I in part would say the same about an individual, that I think that when you are such a cultural icon, there's a certain weight of responsibility that you carry. And so I would also apportion some morality and such,
Yeah.
and to that, in specifically looking at an individual. I probably would as well. And so that makes more sense as to why you place that in that conversation, because
Yeah.
that's a something that is definitely near to your understanding and comprehension of that. So
Yeah. I agree. So my definition of success in this particular case doesn't just involve the player on the field; it also
mhm,
involves the player off the field. So, as an
mhm.
example, I loved Gronkowski on the field. Off the field, I was not really much of a fan. It's like
Hey, he's gonna get himself that Navy, whatever it is, the retire. He's gonna get himself a membership. You just wait. No, just kidding.
right, exactly, exactly. But so there.
Uh,
But you see my point. So in my definition of success of being the GOAT, for me, it also included your character off the field. Just because you can throw a ball doesn't mean anything. I mean, Anthony Brown was a heck of a player, but okay, you need some help. You're not really. You're to me the best part of a player is not just on season; it's off season.
mhm.
So
Antonio
yeah,
Brown, a great recent point to that is a player that arguably, again, back to however you define it, could
yeah,
potentially have been in the conversation of, if he would have continued
yeah.
his career, he could have been contending for the conversation of the greatest wide receiver of literally all time.
Right,
And
I agree.
and there were different pieces, and we still to this day, and probably for a long while, won't know, if ever won't know, what truly led to those things. Was it Vontez Burfict big hit in the playoff game that blew his head off his shoulders? Was it other certain things, fame getting to his head? We won't know.
Yeah,
We will not
you
know.
won't.
But
You won't.
that does very much limit when you look at being a fan of that player, being a fan of the player. And that's where, for me, being a fan of a person is separate from, it can be a part of what, somebody being a great player. Like, somebody can be a great player without me being a fan of them, in the same way that somebody can be a great player without being a morally good person,
Yes,
specific
exactly.
to
Yep.
player. But here, like, I'm not gonna support you, and I'm not gonna cheer for you, and I'm not gonna, like, be drawn to you because of these other things. These other things have big effect on, especially when you look at it as a dad, as a husband. Right now, I'm starting to think, even outside of my own intrigue and interest here, what things that I am seen having interest in, what things that I am seen having draw to, are now is now my son going to see. And if
Yeah.
if if I am allowing the idiocy of a certain person to be what is seen by my son as something that I adore, that's something that I am a fan of, well, then
Yeah.
how's that going to affect? We can see a direction that can begin to head, and
Yeah.
in how our children are raised, which is why I think this connection. One of the things here, taking these fun conversations about greatest of all time success in football, but also the character of a human, the
Yeah.
character of a man,
Yeah.
and looking at how does that play into my understanding of them as a player. And this is one of those things I joke all the time. I don't joke, I'm serious. But this couch back here, Cleats Off the Couch, the idea of when two people, doesn't have to be two dudes. I know a lot of ladies who are very mindful of football, but sit down, have a conversation about general things. It may start with
Yeah.
football, but where else does it go? Well, if we're talking about Tom Brady, we're going to be talking about, especially recently,
Marriage,
we're going to be talking about
identity.
marriage. We're going to be talking about work, family, work balance, and we're going to be talking about these kind of things. I mean, some of these pieces that we've been placing in are just, we may have certain questions that we were thinking about talking about, but it doesn't mean that these other pieces aren't going to naturally come up, because this is just natural
Right.
conversation. And so in that same way, we see how work and life balance, or lack thereof, or lack of the choice of one of those two, has negatively affected Tom at this point.
Yeah.
It brings me to then us. person listening, us talking. We're not here to grandstand and be seen as high and mighty so the people listening would grow and learn and be like us. Please don't be like me. But the
For me.
um but how has it affected us? This is something I've been doing. Just a little insert here as we're looking towards this episode probably coming out around Christmas. I've been doing everyday posts on TikTok from my own account, Delcary, the personal account outside of Cleats Off the Couch. Each day, taking just a term or two, just a word or two, and just dwelling on like something that's drawn to my mind to dwell on. As my wife and son and I, well, he can't really read, but it's about making habit and stuff. We have it's back there on the arm of the couch, but it's just a morning and evening thought kind of thing with Christmas, as you're heading each day closer to Christmas. And so each day it's been delivering a term and just sharing that through TikTok so that others could be challenged to think more about that. So the first day, it was waiting. The second day, it was expectation, and out of expectation, remembrance and anticipation. And then yesterday, it was about busyness, and it's been 4 days. I don't remember what the third one was, but it's on there. It's on there.
Yeah.
And so with these, this thinking about Tom, I'm making a connection, I promise. The thinking about this work family life balance, talking it about with Tom, I think it's a great piece for news. It's a great piece for us because we can talk about our own thoughts and we can input our own, different little things. And it's like gossip. It's fun, right? It's not good, but it's fun. And so with that, I think it's good in this mindset to dwell a little bit upon with our own life, work, family, balance. And so not only how has it affected Tom, but how has it affected us? Individually, you and I, I think it might be good for us to even share, because I love being authentic and I want people to know that we do not for a second think that we are greater than you who are listening. In fact, I would consider myself probably less than you who is listening. And you may have a lot of better thoughts for different things, like Tom Brady as the GOAT, or even as working for family, or raising a family, whatever it may be. I'm always looking to learn. I'm always looking to grow and understand. But for us all to sit and think, how has work-life balance affected us individually and as generally as humans? I think this could be a big topic, so we might have to be careful how much time we spend on it. But I would ask you, how has this topic of what's an example, whether success or failure, whatever you feel comfortable sharing, how has this topic of family and work balance affected you?
Yeah. So normally when my birthday comes around, I mentioned before we started, my birthday was 5 days ago, and normally when my birthday happens, I try to avoid it. I try to hide it. If somebody wants to give it to me, give happy birthday. I don't want, no, leave me alone. Because usually I go through this self-assessment. Did I do enough? Right throughout the year, I assess. I set a lot of goals. Did I achieve any of those goals? And usually those goals I end up reassessing and reevaluating and saying I didn't achieve what I needed to achieve. I'm 35 years old, 36 now. I'm 36 years old. I'm working to my PhD. I'm not there yet. I'm working to building a website, building a business. I'm not there yet. I'm working at doing this. I'm not there yet. And I focus so much on. Ironically, we were talking about success. I don't know that I've ever really self-defined it so that it's certain this is what success looks like to me, for me. And it becomes a problem because I end up giving my family my leftovers because I've never actually achieved. It's like declaring war against an ideal. Well, that ideal is always going to exist, and so you'll forever be at war. There's never any peacetime, and so your family gets the leftovers of whatever that is. So, but this past 5 days ago, I was actually really excited about it because I had done my self-assessment. I'm like, I had set the right amount of goals, and I realized that my achievement, my success, was not built on what I can do. We talked about this in a previous conversation, but we're called human beings for a reason. We're not human doings. And so my work-life balance, I work from home for medical and manufacturing company. I'm the quality assurance engineer. I am building my own business at the same time called Noble Minded Press. I am writing a book at the same time. I'm a worship leader. I'm sponsoring two drug addicts, homeless people. One's a vet that are living with good friends of ours, but we're sponsoring them. So every couple of days we check on them and see how they're doing. We have and there's so many different spokes in the fire. Um, and I'm at risk of those spokes becoming the primary focus of of who I am, when in reality, who I am is determined based off of what I've been designed, or how I've been designed by a greater being, not myself. And so I totally understand. Anytime somebody has an issue with work-life balance, I feel their pain because I'm walking through it at the same exact time.
Mm.
It is increasingly difficult for me to make sure my family does not get my leftovers. It's a lot like budgeting. You have to kind of budget your time a little bit.
Yeah.
And if you read any good financial books, they'll tell you pay yourself first. Right? In other words, put your money into savings, pay yourself first, then pay your bills, then go out with fun money. But pay yourself first. Pay for your retirement, pay for your savings first. And in comparison, in other words, it's pay your family first. And instead, what I'm doing is if I have leftovers, then I'll save. If I have leftovers, then I'll give it to my family. And then again, but what you're doing is you're not really saving for retirement. You're not saving for the future. You're going to end up continually in this cycle of living a check by check, both financially and physically and spiritually with your family. You're going to be living check by check, where if I have leftovers, sure, Emma, I'll help you out. Sure, my wife, I'll help you out. Or in most cases, they'll come in, hey, Dad, can we spend time with you? I'm not now. I'm dealing with this. And they get the leftovers. And in reality, what I should be doing is budgeting my time and saying, no, you get the first of my fruits. Then everything else comes next. You're my first ministry. You're my first relationship. And that's hard to do because all these other things seem more important at the time because they're more urgent or time sensitive. And you think that there's a safety in kind of giving your family the okay, you can wait because I know that it's safe to give you this. I can yell at you. I can't yell at this person. I can not give you my time here, but this person really needs it. And if I don't do that, they may misinterpret that. And it's almost like I care more about what you think, but it's safe to not care what you think because I know at the end of the day, you'll still be there. And Tom seems to be going through that same thing, or seemed to be going through that same thing. It's like, my family's always going to be there, but this is really urgent. And then all of a sudden his family's no longer there. And he admitted the first 3 games after it happened, you lose out. You start to forget that your family is actually what makes you who you are. And if you don't give them the proper time, everything you think is more important you'll start, first of all, realize it's not as important. And number 2, you start realizing that these things are starting to diminish in their success, whatever you define that as. You were working towards success, and the catch-22 is you became a failure in the thing you valued. You got to start with your family. Pay yourself first.
Yeah. When you go to stretch yourself between too many things, you create exhaustion for yourself, and the more you get exhausted within yourself, the less of yourself you actually become, and the less of yourself you're actually able to share. So yeah, that's, it's a couple things stuck out to me that you were saying there. Like one of the things was I really like, I didn't even think about it myself when we were talking about the success piece, and I was talking so specifically about what I think success for the greatest quarterback would be and stuff like that. And you had said about thinking about what success actually means for myself. That's a really good point. Like I don't think I've actually, like, I can sit down and tell you, no, it's very simple. If you process these things, this is what success for a quarterback looks like, or this is what success, like, I don't think it takes much thought. It's pretty darn simple, black and white, da-da-da. Well, John, what about for you? Oh crap.
Oh.
Like it's like, wait a minute. Define what success is for yourself. And it's just like, whoa, wait a minute. What a good thing for us to spend time to processing. What does it actually mean to be successful? Like for yourself, what would it mean for you to be successful? Obviously, we had talked earlier about like the idea of success, like is that attempt, that desire to accomplish whatever said things for the specific. Well, for you, what is that thing in which you are trying to accomplish, and actually would be a successful thing in your life, in your being, in whatever. That might be the word of the day for me today. But anyway, is this idea of success and the differentiation of meaning behind it. Because when we talk about success, we also have to talk about why, right? Like, why is that what is success? Why is that? Where does that come from? And we'll get to kind of a little bit more conversation in that direction here in a second. But the other thing that stuck out to me, and actually it might be encouragement to yourself or to somebody else. Yesterday, I'd spent time on the word busyness. And when we look at this Christmas season, people are busy, busy, busy all the time. And one of the things that this person had shared with me in this book was this idea of looking at what makes you so busy this season and why. What is your reasoning behind your calendar being full? And looking at if I, as a Christian, and not everybody listening may be, that's completely fine, but I'm going to share from my own experience and thinking through this. If I, as a Christian, am busy during Christmas season and what it represents is the birth of my Savior, is the birth of Jesus. And Easter would be a similar conversation, because arguably more important, because that's about the sacrifice and the resurrection. And so, but if I'm a Christian and I'm in the Christmas season and I'm busy, shouldn't that busyness that I have be because there's an expansion that's happening within the kingdom?
It should be.
And then is it? So am I busy for the right reasons? Like, it's
Right.
okay. In fact, it's good to be busy, right? We are given work as a blessed thing, right? But what are we focusing on, and is it good? Is it right?
Yeah, I might even tail into what you just said about the expansion as well. Just and keep going with your thought. But the expansion, I know a lot of people that will look at the expansion of the kingdom and say, if what I'm doing is for the expansion, it's a good thing, and that's true. But oftentimes, if you're so focused on expanding and you're not actually also discipling what you already have in the kingdom, right? If you're not nurturing the business, if you're not nurturing your family, you end up losing the kingdom that you already had, even though you're expanding it elsewhere.
Well,
So
and
you got to do both.
yeah. And I think this would come to that kind of defining of terms things in the similarity of the goat in success. In
Yeah.
this way of understanding what I mean by expanding the kingdom would be, there's a lot of facets to that, but the word that really stuck out to me was about holiness. Is it holy?
Yes.
Is it holy? Is it something that brings about the character of God, the image of God, the growth of those who are followers of Christ? So that can look like multiple things. It can look like, am I growing? Are these reasons that I'm busy helping me to grow? Are they helping my family to be discipled and to grow? Are they helping other people to see the reason behind the season? Are they helping others to experience? So it's a whole complete, there's a whole bunch of different directions of this, but just that. So that was really part of it. And service also popped up too. This picture of obviously a very practical means of doing those things, which is placing service in some way into the calendar during Christmas season, so that the busyness, that's at least one thing that we as a family are making a point to do that, to make sure that some of the reason that we are busy, if not the entirety of why we're busy, is because we are looking to make our calendar holy. We are looking to make sure that the reason we're busy, and family can be a part of that, right? Different Christmas traditions can be a part of that, putting up going shopping and putting up a tree, but there's more to it than just, I gotta chop down a tree. And I find that, I'm saying that because that was personal to me even just 2 weeks ago, in the way of like, we got to make sure that this is in here. Well, why is that in there? The reason
Right.
is because of the tradition that now you create. For me, and just sharing that quick, and I don't want to get too stuck on Christmas, because this is a conversation, a topic that can be for any time of the year.
Right.
But the picture of, I introduced my wife to going shopping for a live Christmas tree when we first got married. And she absolutely loved it. Why? Because the experience, because of the memories, because of the different, and it was something that we could do together. And is that something that specifically preaches the gospel? Is that something that specifically points to the manger? Is that something that points to the cross? Specifically, no, but it's still something that can be a part of showing and growing in the character and the image of God, and therefore it can be a part of what is holy, because what is good. Um, and so that's just an example. And so, like, for people, I was concerned that people hear me talking about that both in that TikTok and even now, that if I were to say something along the lines, well, it's all got to be focused on that, that's sometimes some people get into that, is like, oh, everything you do in the Christmas season, you can't just fill up your calendar with busyness, it better point to the manger. Well, it doesn't have to. Like, yes, that should be a part of what you do, and it should always be remembrance and anticipation. Remembrance of the first Christmas, anticipation of the second coming. Like those should always be a part of what's happening. But at the same time, when I go and visit my widowed grandmother, like, I'm visiting her to let her tell stories from her past. I'm visiting her to have laughter. I'm visiting her to bring joy, and to be and minister, as a grandson. And so, like, that in itself, that's a holy thing. Like, I'm
Yes.
now don't I am not holy. I am broken, and I am nasty, and I am dirty. But because of Christ, I am seen as holy by the Father. And
Yep.
so the things that I do, am I busy because of myself, or because of my Savior? And that's a big thing with this work-life balance conversation, in the way of busyness. Am I fulfilling all these? Do I have all these spokes on the tire? Why are they on there? Are they there for you because of like what you want to accomplish? And that goes back to the success thing. Are they there because you want to succeed, you want to be successful in something? Okay, well, it's not a bad thing to want to be successful. It's not a bad thing to want to work hard. It's not a
No.
bad
Right.
thing to want to have uh, um, fulfillment in what you do. I mean, if you're a man, that's generally a part of what you feel
Who we are.
already. Is wanting to actually do, you know. Um, but what is driving that? Why is that? Is it because you just feel the obligation that, well, I need to be able to buy gifts for my kid? That was going back to the Christmas thing again. But
Yep.
is it the obligation of, well, I have to, my wife's a ball and chain, but I've got to, I'm married, I've got to be able to bring home a paycheck? Or what's the why behind what you're doing? With the
Yep.
Tom situation, is like, okay, well, it wasn't as much of a drag for him. No, it was an excitement of how much he loves and the passion he has for the game. But
Yep.
why? Like, ultimately, why football?
Right.
Why football? And you had mentioned the term identity. What is your identity that is driving that? And that brings us
Right.
again to something else. I keep chaining things
Yeah.
together. I feel like Paul in Second
Good.
Corinthians. But I but with that, um it's affected us individually. You had shared a little bit about yourself, and for myself, I'm in a completely different place. This is an interesting thing to see. The different perspective of this is, like, for myself, I've been in a place to where I really sensed a direction change this past February, and I stepped out of my position, and then I was doing different things that were temporary, when it comes to job, with substitute teaching and such. And then the summer, I was full time with my son for 3 months, and completely different perspective. Now, granted, were there different things that were I was feeling struggles against? 100%. And actually, that, I think, feeds into this work family balance conversation, because I found myself, I had a great privilege and opportunity that many times I found myself frustrated with, because I was home full time with my son, and I wasn't able to be working on different things, especially like in the content world, that I really felt that, for me as a Christian, I felt that I was being called towards doing, because it was there were connections that had been made, there were platforms that I had been given, opportunities that were in front of me, that I could not do anything to feed into or to add to, because I was home with my son.
Mhm.
And because of different boundaries and such that we had set up, my wife and I, for my son, he being at the time under 2 years old, we were specifically approaching different things with screen use and different stuff like that
Yeah.
negatively affected my capability to do different things with content. And so I see that as something to where I was allowing what even my identity, and this may be a little like for those who are Christians who have struggled with calling and such before. I found myself idolicizing calling
Well done.
over just being faithful
Yep.
in what was in front of me. And I have a different story for a different time about a situation I had with calling and the things from, I think it was First Thessalonians 4 that I was called out about by the Lord with being, look, when I was seeking after, what am I called to? What am I supposed to be doing? And I was very frustrated because I knew that what I was doing was no longer what I was supposed to be. Like I felt that tension. I sensed that I was in the wrong place, but with that, I didn't know what was next.
Right.
And what I kept getting drawn back to, I had a crazy experience. I'm not going to get too much into that right now, but a 3-day experience out in the woods in a cabin alone with no technology and stuff. And it was being drawn to, out of First Thessalonians 4, I think it was, I called you as a disciple, as a follower of Jesus. I called you as a husband, and I called you as a father. And that was what I was left with. And I was like, oh, and those other things about your calling in community and your calling in your professional career, like those they'll come, but you need to focus on these three things. And as a guy, I'm like, but what do I need to be doing? And that was a Jacob fighting with God situation, wrestling together in trying to figure out, what am I doing? What needs to happen? And anyway, so that came to fruition into the full, stepping out from where I was the summer of watching my son, and then football this fall, and falling in love with football all over again, honestly, with the strategy side, the coaching side, defensive side, and
Right.
and from there, still being in a place of like, okay, like I still don't know. I still don't know all the pieces, but you know what? This Cleats Off the Couch thing, I really feel, I really see and sense a great direction for this, to where not only is it something that I absolutely love, but also, Lord, I see how it can glorify you. I can see how it's a great thing. So I'm going to do this, and I'm going to be faithful in this,
Right.
and I'm going to look for the affirmation for or against it while I'm actively fulfilling this, but also not wanting to negate family in the way of provision, in the way of time, all those kind of things. And so I'm in a weird opposite, of what you're talking. You've got all these spokes going, and you're tired, and trying to figure out
Yep.
how to do that. And for me, I feel like sometimes it's almost just like, God, I'm not doing enough. Like what is, and I it's a difficult place to be, because I come from a background of the ladies in my family. I grew up with a single mom mainly, and the women in my family are still the same to this day. I joke with them about it, but to where their understanding of work is work until you're dead, and in order to rest, you work some more. And so like I just got to encourage my sister the other yesterday, even, I think it was, just the understanding of, like, I'm proud of you for taking a break. I'm proud of you for, got some bad news about my biological father's mom, heart attack, passed away. And I said to her, like, I'm proud of you for driving home from work and not forcing yourself to work, because that's her personality, is, I'm just gonna work through this, I'm just gonna, no, go home. You have bereavement time. Like, go home and do what you need to do with that. And I was really happy, and I got to tell her that, which, she has
Good.
heard from me every now and again to poke at her about resting. But the issue is they don't know how to rest, and that's a completely different topic that we could talk about, is not knowing how to rest. I've been
Right.
listening to it, episodes from the Bible Project about rest, but anyway, I feel like I took myself way down a certain road here. And work-life balance, two ends of the spectrum, you, me, and others may find themselves somewhere matching those, or somewhere in between. But when talking about work and life balance, there's an importance as a general human being that we are fulfilling both sides of the coin here. Because we should not be all family, no work, because first of all, we're not doing family right if there's no work involved. Anyway, I don't know what kind of family y'all have if you're able to give everything into family and not have to work at it a little bit.
Right.
And then on the other side, all work and no family. Like those are like, and family there also, I would kind of input can also mean blood and choice, right? Because
Yes.
when we think about, I think about maybe a single person who's really into their career and such, it's still important that you are finding those friends and such. Maybe you don't have anybody, lost parents, don't have, aren't close to home anymore. You had completely left out to kind of get away from that or something, whatever the story may be. I feel like I'm setting the tone for a Hallmark movie, but you have uh, you have somebody who needs to be able to make friends, not identifying somebody for a sexual relationship, but to make friends, to connect, to support, to encourage, to build up, to challenge, to be family with. And so that's a little piece I'll have there, because I know that there may be some who listen who honestly don't have family. We do have family. We should look to have family. It just may look differently than blood family. And it's the same if you're a follower of Christ in that way. I mean, your local church, you should be looking for ways to connect in and build family. Or what I've been able to do too, and I don't know if this has been the case for you, online, I've been able to connect. Not that should be a place in which we reside, if you will, but man, has that been a benefit? Has that been a huge support to me in who is a part of my family and who helps to encourage, to challenge, to edify, to do all those things. I mean, hence you and I's relationship. We've never met in person, right? But
Right.
we've
Right.
met through online, and we've been able to continue those kind of conversations and those challenges, etc. So work, life, those are necessary things. In life, what has to be worked out though is the balance of those things. Those both exist, but the balance of those things is what's so important. And so
I also,
go ahead. You
I'd also like to encourage also that the balance doesn't necessarily mean find the median, right? There's no
Yes.
50-50. It also depends on the relationship that you're speaking about. And I say relationship between, I'm sure you got a lot of men on that are listening to this that would, for instance, might say, okay, so I need to balance my work life 50 and my family 50. Well, it really, again, it depends on your situation, but what you don't want is an extreme of either side. Median is not necessarily it. That's, by the way, it's a logical fallacy there. It's called median fallacy. It's where, in order to, if you have two opposing sides, the best solution is in the middle. And that's not always true. So, there's cases where somebody that's called, for instance, out in the ministry in a public eye might have more ministry than family, but they're not neglecting their family in the process. I mean,
Mhm.
there's clear indication within the Bible that talks about a family being the man's first ministry. But that doesn't necessarily mean that is his only ministry, or that is his primary ministry, or that ministry takes the same amount of time. You got to be discerning with the Holy Spirit that is within that it should be residing within you as a sealing of your salvation, to decide whether or not what that balance should look like. And that's gonna be a little bit subjective, based on your personal relationship. But yeah, that work balance life has to exist properly.
Yeah, and if you don't mind taking a minute too, I realize we keep using the term ministry to family and such, but
Mhm.
why don't you take a second just unpack that, just to give, if anybody's curious about, we keep talking about this ministry word. What does that mean when we're talking about ministry to family?
So I had a discussion ironically, with a family member about this, actually, and she said, she kept trying to present to me saying ministry is a program, right?
Mm,
Ministry is a program. Ministry is a way of servicing someone else, and I'm like, no, that's not ministry at all. Biblically speaking, ministry is missional, and missional means you treat the person you're serving as if they're family. And in the midst of a family, you're going to have conflict. You're going to have, I mean, just today, good example. You and I had a disagreement in just a definition of success, and we resolved it. There's a tension, a healthy tension, I think, in a lot of ways, that helps us get closer together. We unpack the language and so on, and that's going to happen everywhere. You go through this disillusionment when you first get married, especially if you've built a personal identity. Um, Before you get married, right? If you get married, let's say in your 30s, you have about a decade worth of personal identity that has been established before you get married, and then it
mhm.
becomes disillusioned, like all immediately, because when two parties come together, you have to be willing to sacrifice those two identities to create a whole new culture, a whole new identity together. And that's true whether you have a wife or if you're bringing in a new family into your home. As far as ministry is concerned, when you minister or when you have a ministry itself, you are creating a whole new identity, a whole new culture. So when I say ministry to your family and that's your first ministry, it's because they're the first ones that you service. They're the first ones that you sacrifice for. They're also sacrificing for you in the process. And there's a mutual understanding of growth. And very quickly, I want to unpack growth real quick because I've thought a lot about this in the last couple of weeks. There's a misconception I think about what to expect when it comes to growth rate of people. And I posted this earlier today, and you're on Facebook with me, so you may have already seen this. But what should be the adequate and accurate way of measuring growth rate in someone else? We often think that we should compare them to what we think they should be, or we should compare ourselves to what we think we should be. And that's not the proper way of measuring our growth. We should be comparing ourselves from our identity today and our character today from what we were yesterday or where we were yesterday. And if you see a difference, you see a change in some way, that's growth. Our object as believers is to find a way to accelerate that growth to the greatest capacity. And we can't do that, of course, without the Holy Spirit. So when I say minister to your family, in what ways are you growing with your family? In what way are you inciting, as a man, inciting your family to grow as well? Now, as a father, I have a charge to raise my family up in the way of the Lord. That as a father, I have a charge to make sure that my children are growing in such a way that they are constantly questioning, that at some point they're going to grasp and procure their own faith. It's not going to be because dad said so. It's because they know they know. And am I imparting that upon them as fervently as I am in my outside ministries? If not, then I've got a bad balance. They should be my first balance. I should be going to them and making sure that their faith is being established, that I am ministering to them and they're growing in their faith. They're growing in their walk. They're growing in their academia. If I'm focused more on the outside in that aspect more than I am on them, if my outside ministries are growing in that aspect, my family's not, my balance is wrong. Mm-hmm. So that's what I mean by ministry.
Okay, so if I were to simplify that,
Sure.
To minister to someone, right, is this idea of to serve or to provide a necessary, I don't want to say necessary need because that's obviously the same thing, a necessary service to somebody or multiple somebodies. And so in this case, specifically looking at work life, we're talking about family, we're talking about providing the necessary services to your family members, and so serving and helping them to grow into becoming, in our case, followers of Christ, as well as thinkers, people who think and yes, are able to think for themselves and are able to provide, I want to use the word good citizens, those who will be productive and good citizens for their society around them, whether that's local or regional or national, whatever. So there's a lot of pieces that we're looking to provide. Yeah. And so when you say ministry, we're talking, a lot, like you said, a lot of people, even if you were to Google it, I can tell you this, if you were to Google yes, ministry definition, it would tell you that it's either the position of something with government, or it's something with a person in clergy, a person in the church. And no, when that's we're right, talking about ministry, we're talking about the action of ministering to people. And so I just felt like we needed to kind of define that a little. I'm glad you said what you said about growth, because that's such an important piece, especially when we're talking about family.
Yes.
And even when we're talking about work as well, because what we should be doing in work a lot of times requires growth as well. So if we're stagnant within our work, are we doing work the way we're intended to be doing work?
Yes, and I want to reiterate that ministry is missional, which means that not only are you providing that service, but you're also being receptive to the services being provided to you, even if it's unintentional. So I'm learning from my wife, I'm learning from my kids, and I'm growing because I'm watching them as well. So there's a mutual balance between the two. Yeah. And that's true in whatever ministry or whatever, really it's relational. Whatever relationship you have, that's a ministry. Yes, especially if both sides are growing.
Ministry can happen in programmatic methods, but it cannot happen void of relational means.
Yes. Oh, well said. Well said.
So that's been a huge conversation piece for me over the years, especially when serving in ministry, in the way of like, I know these certain programs are good, but if that's all we're doing, this is trash. Like that sounds really harsh,
Exactly.
but
No, but you're
but
right.
it is, because we
Absolutely.
see what has happened, and some people who may not be who may not be Christians and stuff because of whatever reason may be hearing something like this and be like, yeah, he gets it. He gets it. What the church is doing is dumb. Like, no, that's not what I'm saying. But you can see negative effects from the past how many
Yeah.
decades because of how the Western church has been doing things. And I think there's a reason there's such a thing as relational discipleship, incarnational ministry. Like, these kind of things exist. I know there's some words that some people might be like, dude, this guy's speaking Greek, but they do come from Greek. Anyway, no. But anyway, so I just think that ministry to family, huge, important for us to understand. And you know, when we look at this idea of family work-life balance, there's one other thing you touched as kind of looking towards the end of our conversation today, but this idea of identity. You know,
Yes.
this idea of identity shapes how we approach and have an understanding to work and life and the balance of those things.
It
And
does.
one of the things, you know, we talked about, we see this and we look at this with Tom, and we see the identity in football. That's what we've seen, and that's an
Yep.
observation piece. I'm sure if we had opportunity to sit down and have conversation, hey, Cleats Off the Couch, Tom, love to talk to you. So we'd I really don't know what I'd do if I one day got a call from Tom Brady about being on the podcast.
Right.
But anyway, I might have to delete episode 12. I But with this, we have this idea of identity, and a lot of times we don't think about our identity, and we go based upon what we think may be a good idea, or just what is supposed to be, right? Because this is what you're supposed to do, right? And I think there's more depth necessary to that, and we look at sometimes then our success stories or our failures then to let them continue to define us, even though we don't originally have an identity in which we're trying to identify things, and it continues to take us down this baseless, foundationless, honestly, uh, um, desperation, like this route of despair, in the way of, and we'll get to that term here in a second, but this route of despair, and like, it's concerning for me to see people in that place, because it's like, but you don't have anything that you are actually, like,
Yeah.
rooting in. Like, you're not rooted in something to help give you something to stand upon. And like, I don't want you to stand on a precipice. Like, I don't want you to
Right.
stand on the cliff's edge. I want you to have a means for supporting why you're doing what you're doing, because, man, to have that purpose and fulfillment of understanding for yourself, for your life, it gives a whole new fruit to why you work, and why you do what you do with family. And so we come to this identity, and we look at, there's different falsehoods, there's different lies we believe about our identity, right? I remember you had said about our situation, right? Our situation, often we like to identify ourselves in, and what we
Yep.
do sometimes, like, okay, so tell me a little about yourself. Well, I'm John, I'm a dad, or, I'm John,
Right.
I'm a businessman. It's just like,
I'm
I
architect.
do
I'm all,
business,
yeah.
and it's just like, well, you do that, but is that your identity? Yeah, okay. Well, we need to talk about that. If that's all of which you find yourself in, what's going to happen when you fail at doing business? What happens when you fail at being a dad? Whatever. But what you do, your situations, your circumstances, we put a false identity in these things because they will fail us. Like, the reason why I say it's false to anybody listening is because they will fail you. They will fail you. Any identity you place in human understanding, when it comes to what you do, it will fail you, because you cannot perfectly continue to fulfill said thing. And so
Yeah.
therefore, logically, you will fail. Like,
Yes.
it's
Yes.
and so with that, we have to look at where our true identity comes from. I'm gonna let you talk a little bit about that, because I know you had brought up a really good point about the word whose, not what, or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah, and you're right. So because the identity of what you do and who you are, it's not as important as whose you are. And what I mean by that is, who are you defining that identity from? Who gets to identify? Who gets to define your identity? And we all do it. And you end up with a couple of different ideas of what that could look like. You end up with, you know, well, no one identifies. No one tells me who I identify with. Well, that's not really true, because if I were to ask you who you are and you define who you are, who came to that definition? Right. And of course it was you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there really is no such thing as nothing. Right. So it starts off with immediately. And I know a lot of people might say no, nothing, but you can almost immediately shut down that conversation by applying the claim to itself and say, no, there's no such thing as nothing. You define yourself. So that leaves really a couple of categories. You either define yourself by you, you'll identify yourself by your social construct, or your social group, right? Your friends or your family or things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. By what society says, that's more outside of that scope of social norms. So that's more, your culture or your depending on what paradigm or group identity you might find yourself in. Well, I'm a male, so I identify with what males think males should be, or fill in the blank. Or it's going to go into what you call supreme, right? Where you're defining yourself based off of whatever religious divine entity will define you, and that could be whatever religion you define, or it could be just a philosophical identity. Like Taoism or and so either way you deal with this though is like, okay, so I understand who defines me now, and let's assume for a minute you were able to self-assess and find out where that definition is actually coming from someone who says, I believe I am a this. Like you mentioned, we tend to define ourselves either by what we do or by what career we have. But like you said, that's destined to fade. Let's imagine for a minute, Tom is a good example of this because Tom Brady is a quarterback for the NFL. At some point, he's going to get too old and he's not going to be able to play. Right? And there's conversation right now as an example. He's starting to see that.
TB12 or otherwise, it's going to fail.
It's going to fail. Yes. Going to fail. And so he's recognizing this and he's realizing, he's like, the way it's got to end, I've got to go back to the Patriots. And he said that recently, by the way. And there's at the end of this year, this is the story I was talking about at the very beginning. At the end of this year, he's going to go back to being a free agent, the second time in his career. And the question is, where's he going to go after that? And he's got a couple viable options and so on. And there's a couple teams that are looking for him, but he really wants to go back to the Patriots.
I've heard San Fran
because he wants to end his career then. Sorry?
I've heard San Fran.
San Fran is one of them. Yes, exactly. Las Vegas is another one, right? And so he's like, I really want to go back to San Fran was a more of a viable option because that's his hometown. But Patriots is because that's where he started. And he's got a great relationship with Kraft, the owner, and Belichick and him, they had about a 20-minute, little over 20-minute meeting during their last, the game that they hosted and they played together. So there's still a relationship that's pretty decent there. So Tom is looking to go back to his roots. It's like he's looking for that conclusion to his story, right? Like an old relationship, for instance. You're looking not conclusion. Looking for closure. That's a good word.
I got
right?
you. Yeah.
Looking for closure, and again, like we said, that's going to stop at some point. So he's going to end up going to Fox. Or he's going to end up going to, becoming a commentator, and his glory days are over. So his identity right now, and he made this statement many times: family and football are my most priority. This is who I am. This is where I find peace. And then his family's gone. So now the only thing he finds peace is in his football. But now that's going to be gone just because age won't allow him to stay on. So now who are you? Is your identity changing? Is that really how we define ourselves? Can our identities change from one place to the next? And I'm like, no, I don't think so, because it all depends on who you're defining as. If you're defining by self, you naturally change. In which case, you'd never be certain about who you are. If it's society, or your social norm, I should say, your social construct, your friends change, your family changes. And again, that means you'll never be certain about who you are. If it's society, well, that's historically changing, always.
Yeah.
So you'll never be certain about who you are. And if it's divine, well, it depends on the divine entity that you're defining yourself through. Most religions have divinity that will change. So again, you won't be certain about who you are. So who are you defining yourself from, right? Mm-hmm. And you end up with one of two main approaches to this, right? This, I am a quality assurance employee, and I'm proud of that because I do it very well. Or in Tom's case, I'm a quarterback, and I'm the GOAT, whatever that might be. And so I do that very, very well. Well, great, but that's going to fade at some point. So right now you have pride, but later on you're going to go to despair. And those are your two approaches, right? You're going to end up with, I'm this, and I do it very well, and now you're identifying with something you're good at, and you go to pride. Or you identify with something, and you realize you're failing at it, and now you go to despair. And so instead of being defined in success, now you're being defined in failure, and your identity might even be, I'm a failure. And that's so wrong, completely wrong from the truth. And that despair can lead into some really clinical, really real issues like depression. But if you realize that you're defined by the who, and that who is greater than yourself, greater than what can change. And this is why I'm a Christian. This is one of the biggest reasons why I'm a Christian, because the gospel is such a sword that splits that pride and despair right down the middle and gives a truth, the sword of truth, right? It gives a truth that is so affirming. You're not worthy. You are not defined by what you can do, because what you can do will fail you. You're not defined by your friends and family, because they will fail you. They will change. You're not defined by what society thinks, because they're going to fail you as well. They're constantly changing. You're defined by who I made you. Speaking about God, you're defined by how I made you, and it's not by what you can do. I didn't call you because you were capable. I made you capable because I called you.
Yeah.
Right? He doesn't call the equipped. He equips the called. Right? So it's such an illumination in my own walk, and even watching Tom Brady walk through his. He's like he's an illustration about what all of us are going through. Mm-hmm. Right? We're all trying to figure out where am I in this world? What place? What role do I play? And oftentimes us guys, we have there's a design within us to do. A man who doesn't provide for his own family is less than an infidel, right? Provide for your family. But then that becomes our identity. And that's a weakness, I think. You're not defined by what you do. We're called human beings, not human doings. So what am I? Who am I? I think that's the wrong question. Going back to your first statement. It's not who am I, it's whose am I. Yeah. And that propels the utterance of what I am and what I do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, because even then, I think as a husband, the way that I approach things, or as a father, the way that I approach certain things, when you look at that who versus whose, you can even begin to place incorrect things in the way of whose I am, like I am my wife's, like when you look at that connection in marriage, and therefore you begin to process things and do things accordingly to only thinking of that, and you begin to idolize and make that the focus, make that the place of your identity. But again, that's of your situation, of your circumstance, of what you do, not of whose you are. I think that's such a good thing. And one of the things that came to my mind was, when the beauty of understanding and seeing the gospel, seeing the good news of what Jesus has done, and that Jesus has done it, not me, and that we cannot do it. Only God himself can return us to his perfect standard. Only God himself. And in that, we have these different places of things that we give our identity, these whos, that I am myself's, I am my family's, I am my societal those kind of things that you had pointed out. I got him. Anybody listening, I got him to use the 4 S's. I'm an alliterator, and so to be able to have self, social, society, and supreme, booyah. Right. So if that's easy for you to remember, there you go. But those are different whos, and then the pride and despair of each. What came to my mind was that the gospel and what Jesus has done, it takes the opposites of those two and makes them available to us: hope and humility.
Yes.
And so with that, I think that's something like, I can aim to be as humble a person. And I think about only being empowered by Holy Spirit. I can aim to be humble. But ultimately, when I look at the reason behind my humility, it's for myself. Either I feel good, or I feel like I want to do this, or I need to do this. There's again, pride or despair, which way, like I'm proud that I did this, or I have to do this because if I don't do this, then I'm not actually fulfilling my role in society, that I'm not actually being, there's that despair side. But with humility, I don't believe that you can fully encompass the meaning of humility without God. And I also, on the other side, I don't think that you can have, I would say, dare I say, any, let alone true hope apart from God.
Yes, I agree.
But you can have a ton of pride, and you can have a ton of despair. You can have all those that you want, but those will ultimately lead you into places of emptiness, into a
Yes,
place of emptiness. And so, so I think that those are, I don't want to say emotions. That's not the word I want to use, but I'm going to, because that's the closest thing I think of. They're emotions void, yeah, emotions void of God's presence. But
yes,
when we look at what the gospel, and for anybody listening, if you haven't heard an episode before, sometimes when this conversation comes up, I like to just share it simply for those who maybe have never heard it before. When I say the gospel, it means the good news, and just generally the good news. And specifically, when we talk about the gospel, we're talking about the good news of who Jesus is, the good news of what Jesus has done, the good news.
yes,
The good news being, here's a simple acrostic. I like the alliteration acrostic. There you go. But gospel, God, our sin paying everyone life. And it's not my own creation of this, but it's a simple, easy thing. God created us to be with him. Our sin separates us from him. Sin cannot be removed by good works or good deeds. Paying the ultimate price, Christ died for us, and he
I
rose
like that.
again. And everyone, this is available for everyone. And it's a life that begins now and lasts forever. It's not something that just, I got my ticket to heaven. Once I die, I'm there. It's so much, there's so much more, again, hope. There's so much more hope that comes in this, and that's the thing that I know Aaron and I both can speak out of, is we have this hope because of what we know to be true. And, and, and there's a beauty in that, and that it's not that we don't struggle with the family work dichotomy, if you will, the family work relationship, the family work balance. But because of the hope that we have in Christ, and we can be humbled to
Yeah,
see the ways in which we're failing, and we're given the Holy Spirit. There's another H. We're given the Holy Spirit who helps to transform our hearts, to regenerate within us, and to direct us
yeah,
down the proper understanding of, well, no, this isn't, this not here, this not that much, this whatever. And so I go back to my story I had said about the trying to figure out where's my calling and what am I supposed to be doing. I can seek those things because I have the hope in Christ and what Christ has done for me. It's not because I am a dad, it's not because I am a husband, it's not because I work hard, it's not because I bring in triple overtime pay in the week, it's not because and it's not because of other things. It's not because maybe I abstain from pornography. It's not because I am
right,
very frugal and good with my budget and money. It's not because of those things. It's because of who
right.
Christ is. And out of those things, I can live out those things empowered by the Holy Spirit in a place of humility and hope, not a struggle here and there with pride, struggle here and there with despair. There's many examples, if you read in the Bible, of people who have dealt with both of those things, and people who
Mhm.
speak to both of those things, Paul and King David, I think specifically. And so those things, let that be I hope that's an encouragement to you.
Yeah,
And as humans have our own approach to each who that we may place as an identity upon our lives, but they both have absent ends. And so the
mm,
only way that we find the fulfillment in our identity is understanding whose we are, and
yeah,
that provides us with hope and humility, to be able to approach and live out this life so that we can enjoy we can
yeah,
enjoy this life, and we can live life to the ultimate, to the fulfillment and to the fullest, to the overflowing, that God has for us. That's the literally the only way for us to live that out. Anyway,
yeah. And no, I agree with you, and I'd feel remiss if I didn't bring this up because this is really important about the gospel. And it's so on par with what we've been talking about. Kind of turn around and go back to Brady for a minute. He's identifying himself in his work. He's identifying himself in what he does. And so this becomes a self-identified thing, but it's also society that's probably identifying him. He lost the social side of it because now he's divorced, and he doesn't have a divine who that's defining him. And and I love how you brought this up. So when you go into the gospel, the very first thing you have to do, the very first thing is, who am I? Am I a good person?
mm,
Right? Just start there. Am I a good person? And 99% of people, that's a ambiguous number, obviously, probably not even the truth, but most people will say, I'm a good person. And when you ask them, well, how are you a good person?
By what standard? Yeah.
By what standard are you a good? What, and so again, this goes back to the story in the Bible, not to be too religious, but there's a Bible verse that talks about, the rich man going to Jesus and saying, what must I do to enter the kingdom? Again, it goes right back to do. What must I do? And the first response that Jesus has is, why do you call me good? Because the rich man goes up and says, good teacher, what must I do? And he says, why do you call me good? Only God is good. By implicit, it's like, are you calling me God? Right? And so and then he says, here's what you must do. He's like, well, I do that. So in other words, Jesus just said, only God is good. And the rich man says, well, so am I. Right?
Yeah.
And we all do it. And so but it's very, very important to have a proper assessment. I'm not good. Because in reality of saying that, right, it takes away that pride. And again, either you're in pride, I am a good person, or you realize you're not good and you go to despair. The truth is, you're not good. And it's better to start in despair than it would be in pride, because you got to be torn down in one. You don't have to be torn down in the other. Now you got to be built up in the other. And it's a lot easier to build up than it is to tear down, because most people won't like to be torn down. Everyone loves being built up. So when you realize you're not good, he was good for you. And he's the only one that can be good for you because of who he was. And that's where the gospel is. So the first step, if you're listening to this, the very first step is self-assess. Are you a good person? Find out which side of that pride or despair cycle you're in when you start, and then after doing that, define who is defining you. Is it self? Is it society? Is it your social construct? Is it society? Is it a supreme being? And then from there, decide who is able to make you good. And you'll find that every one of those categories, save one, can't make you good. And you'll start realizing that everything that you're doing is nothing. It changes the way you do things, because if you realize whose you are, and you realize that humility and hope, those opposites of pride and despair, it will drive the utterance of doing things that will truly lead to real success. Truly lead to real success. And it changes you. What else can you do but live for that? To live for him. So
yeah. I always emphasize, man, that when we understand good, we have to understand that we're talking about a perfect standard. Good is to be of completion, of wholeness, right. So when we say we're good, are you perfect? And the understanding is no. And when we understand that we have broken a perfect standard, like we have not fulfilled a perfect standard, it doesn't matter how much good you try and do, you cannot be of complete goodness. You cannot be of complete perfection. It's not possible. And so there has to be a way, like, how do we fix that? How does that get there? Well, we can't, because we have broken it. Right. We are not perfect now. We are separated from that. And so the only way that we get back to that, and that's the one thing that I would encourage anybody, if you look into any faith, the Christian faith is the only faith that shows you that, yes, we comprehend this, we understand this. God did this, not me. Not you.
Yes.
If you look at it's about works. It's about what you can do. It's about how you can do the right things to set you in the proper position. And when you understand that you're trying to climb up you're trying to climb up the impossible mountain, but understand that the one who's at the top of the mountain came down to pick you up and take you up, compared to constantly trying to get up in the midst of everything that exists on the side of the mountain. You can't make your way up there.
Right, because every religion will tell you to do something. I like how you said that. Every religion, the Quran will tell you have to work a certain way, or you have to sacrifice enough people, or otherwise. And then the Hinduism, same thing. Buddhism, the 7 main religions of the world based on their populace: Taoism, Taoism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, and Catholicism. Christianity, Catholicism, and what was the other one? And Islam. Right. But Catholic, like every one of them will tell you what to do. Even Catholicism. They'll say you have to live your life, work this amount of time, and work this effort, and then you'll be saved. And in some cases, like with Roman Catholicism, even when you die, you'll have to work. I mean, it's that bad. You see what I mean? But Christianity, true Christianity, when you're talking about Christ himself, it's done. It is finished. There's nothing you could do. And that itself is a place where you have to humble yourself. There's nothing you could do. He paid for it and he didn't have to.
Mhm.
That's, again, that drives an entirely different narrative and a different purpose for why I live. Right?
Yeah.
It's so important. So I hope Tom Brady does reach that end, because right now he's not defining it correctly, and he's going to see the end of that lead to nothing.
Yeah, and one of the things that we have in hope, because I think also to people who are like, well, what if I am, but what about my family? Well, one, take the word of truth to your family. Be an active participant in loving your family and exempling what it looks like to be Christ, as well as telling of them. That's number one. Number two, I'm a believer in prayer for your family. Like that's a big piece. In fact, that should undergird the first. But also, I want to give some hope to people in the situation of I always I think of funeral ceremonies and stuff in the way of the men on the cross, in that they were sinners and they were thieves and they were ridiculing him, but then in their dying breath, the one specifically, there's that conversation that happens. I'd have to pull up exactly what the words were, but and Jesus ensures him, "You'll be with me today."
I have it. The very first thing was, "Do you not fear God?" Very first thing, he recognized who God was, and then the very next statement was, "We deserve to be here."
He doesn't.
Right? We
Yeah.
deserve. He recognized his own sin. I am not good. I deserve to be here. And then he turns to Jesus and says, "Remember me when you come into your kingdom." And notice he never, because there's an argument in Christianity. I won't get into it, but do you have to be baptized or not? Again, it goes back to that doing. Nope, Jesus didn't. None of that is necessary. The only thing is to recognize your sin, know who God is, and believe. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. And Jesus said right after that, "Today you'll see me in paradise."
Yeah, there's I always forget his name. There's a pastor who does a sermon who talks about the man next to me on the cross said I could come. And
I
and
love it.
and and that's the thing, because he goes through this whole, I forget his name, and it kills me because I think he might be Irish or something like that. But he's a very well-known pastor from, I don't know if he's still alive today, but anyway, he goes through this whole story. It's kind of comedic how he does it. But it sets up such a powerful thing, and he goes through like he die, the guys on the cross, they die, and then walking up and he jokingly, obviously it doesn't make logical sense, but he's like, St. Peter's there, obviously St. Peter's not, because he's still a disciple at the time, but anyway, and he's just like oh no, he says about the angel, he's just like, oh, you're not in the, he's like, what are you doing here, you're not in the book, like and he goes through the situation, and they're just like, well, and it goes through a whole checklist of what many churches hold as musts. And it's just like, well, do you understand the doctrine of grace? Do you understand the doctrine of this? Were you baptized? And the guy's just confused the whole time, just like, well, no, I don't know what that is, and this and anything, and they're just all confuzzled, and this and anything, and they're just like, well, what gives you the right to be here? And he's just like, the man beside me on the cross said I could come. and
I love it.
But it's just this, it's this beautiful reality that, like, to anybody listening, the man on the cross said you could come.
Because that is what, going back to what you said a while back, that's what the Western Church is getting wrong. We want to add something. We want to either add a mediator or add something that people must do on top of what God required.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes literally a false gospel, false good news. If you have to do anything, that's not good news.
Alistair Begg.
Good news. What's that?
Alistair Begg.
Oh, I love that guy. Yes. Yeah,
the man on the middle cross said I could come. Anyway.
Yeah, no, but again, it's not good news if you have to do anything. That's not good news. Good news is you don't have to do anything. It's done. All you have to do is repent and believe, and that's not a thing you do. I'm not performing an action when I believe something different than what I believed before. Mm-hmm. There's no action involved there. It's a brain thing. It's a heart thing, right? It's a confirmation within the Holy Spirit thing. It's not a
and the life I live outpouring from that proves.
Because I used to be an atheist, mm-hmm. right? And it drove me nuts watching the church tell me that the good news was what Jesus was doing for them today, and what you did as a response of all that. That the gospel had to do with your circumstance. Not at all.
Mhm.
The last thing people need to know is who God is to you and what he's done for you. They need to know is what he did and who he is, period. Full stop. Done. It's not good news to add anything else, to add any other mediators, a pope, a priest, a pastor, a parent. There's only one mediator, it's Christ himself, and that's it.
Yeah.
Full stop. And
Yeah.
that's good news. It's so simple. Stop complicating it, Western Church. We got
Yeah. Yeah, and I hope so anybody listening, maybe if you're listening and you're just a fan of football here, you were hearing us talk about Tom Brady and maybe some of this has caught your ear. I want to encourage you, listen, that is the like what we share with you the gospel. It's about believing, taking faith in what Jesus has done for you. And all we do with that, if we truly believe something, right? We live it out, right? If I am a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, I cheer for the Pittsburgh Steelers, right? Like you're not going to see me start cheering for other teams and stuff like that. Like if I claim to believe that Jesus died and rose again for me, I'm going to live the rest of my life like it. Like it's not work. It's an outpouring of gratefulness. It's an outpouring of like James in the Bible talks about like if you show me your faith without works, you can't. It's dead. And that's because if I have faith in Jesus Christ and what he's done, I'm going to start trying. Like Holy Spirit transforms us and helps us and directs us, and I'm going to start trying to love other people, like because thank you, Jesus. Like I love you. You did this for me. I'm gonna love people too.
Story in all the world. It's like I want to tell everybody. You're compelled. It's a response.
Yep.
Naturally.
The fruit tells you what the tree is, and so so if that's the important thing too. It's not about what you do to earn faith. It's about what has been done to give you faith, which is
because you can't earn it.
Yeah, you can't earn it, and then out of that is it just proves what we believe. It proves the faith that we have. That's it. It doesn't create the gateway to the faith we have. It just proves the faith that we have. So, and that's a very important thing I want people to understand. And so
that's actually a great close.
Yeah.
That's a great close.
And so I'd encourage anybody who's maybe had a negative interaction with Christian faith before in the Western Church, or you've maybe had church hurt or something like that. I want to encourage you that the church does not define you. What others have done and made mistakes on does not define who Christ is. We find and understand who Christ is by reading his word, which we could have another whole conversation about its validity and about how we can trust what the Bible teaches us and what it says. But also in that we also have access to Holy Spirit, which we check according to what we have been given through the scriptures, because that has been breathed by Holy Spirit as well. But Holy Spirit can still speak in us and through us today as well. And so those two things important to be held in contest with each other. But I would encourage you to crack open a Bible. Go download the Bible app, YouVersion Bible app, or check out the Bible Project. Just whatever it may be. Start. I always love to encourage people start in the Gospel of Mark. Simple. It's super simple. Some people may recommend like John or Gospel of John or something like that because of how it presents Christ.
I say Luke because it's an easier read, but yeah, same thing.
There you go. Yeah. And so Mark is the Gospel of Mark. Start in a gospel. Start a gospel. The Gospel of Luke is very detailed. It was purposely written for a man named Theophilus so that he could see everything that had happened and had been tested by a historian, Dr. Luke, this guy who had a lot of capabilities. Anyway, and Mark is just it's probably the simplest gospel. It simplifies a lot of different things in the way of like he was just short with his different accounts. Not saying that it misses things. He was short with his different accounts of what happened. And so start by reading the gospel, ask questions. Ask questions. I don't care if it's me, if you send questions to, ask questions to people, find people around you, seek out a local church that is a Bible believing church. Simple thing, you can call up somebody, you can go in and meet somebody and say, hey, do you guys preach from the Bible? Do you believe in the Bible? I've always been somebody that like, I'm not paid to do this, but I have always been more than willing to do research for people in the way of like, if it means that somebody's going to be going to seek out their faith in the church, in a church, they're going to be seeking out to grow in faith. let me know. Let me know your area. You don't even let me know your specific address. Like, I'm not creeping into your privacy, but and I will purposely come beside you and help you find a place, because I believe that we should be in local congregation, and
Yeah.
we should be gathering together, because that's how you grow, when you're around people who are able to, like-minded, as well as to encourage, to edify, to challenge, all those things. And so I would encourage you to start reading. That's what I would say, is start reading to test it yourself. Start reading the gospel. See what it has to say. And I would encourage you. It's not something to go and search on Google about, like, why is the Gospel of Mark wrong, or why is the Gospel of Mark right? Just go and read it yourself. Let that be
Right.
where you start, and let that lead the way. And I promise, great things are ahead. So, but anyway, a lot of great conversation today. I should just get used
Yeah.
to it and
Thanks.
start putting like a 2 hour time period with whoever wants to be on,
I
because I
know.
get.
Well, it's just who you and I are, I guess. I'm
Yeah, yeah.
sorry.
Well, no. Don't be sorry. This is and from the people listening, I hope they're not like, just shut up, because they have a little pause button. They can they can
Right.
hop off at any time. But no, I think this is really good stuff. It's really pertinent for us, because family life balance, family work balance, are pertinent for each and every person who lives on the face of
Yes.
the planet, and even as soon as 8 years old, kind of, sometimes. But so is our identity, even at 8 years old, all the way up. It's something that is important for us, and it's important to set a foundation for us in how we approach everything in life, in how we deal with different things in life, struggles, difficulties, as well as success, um, and the good things that happen in life. And so, whether it's Tom Brady, whether it's insert person, insert job, insert situation here, whatever it may be, think on that. Think
Yeah.
on that. Think on what does success mean for you? Why? Why does it mean that? What is your, like, where do you place your identity? Whose are you? And are you in a place of pride or despair? Even things like that are worth spending time, because they allow you to process more deeply. Well, why? Why are you in a place of despair? Why are you in a place of despair? Where are you placing your identity? Or why are you struggling in your marriage? Why are you struggling in your marriage, but having great success in your work, or whatever it may be? Spend time processing these things, thinking over these things. It is never a bad thing to start with football and end with self analyzation. Unless you're somebody like a Detroit Lions or Cleveland Browns fan, because you have a lot of self realization or self analyzation you need to go through. Uh, but anyway, so kind of want to end it like this, and give you an opportunity to talk about a lot of great conversations. But I want to hear from you. I know you're more of a Tom guy, but what are you seeing with the Buccaneers as we head to the end of the season? Doesn't have to be as specific as, like, okay, do you think they're going to win this next game? Do you think but how are you seeing them end out when it comes to the NFC South? How are you seeing them end out with playoffs? How are you seeing things for Tom this offseason? You had already
Yeah.
mentioned about free agency. Give me some thoughts moving forward. People hear my predictions all the time. I want to hear yours.
Yeah, sure, sure. Yeah, so I think the Bucks probably will make the playoffs, but that's probably where it will end for them this year.
Win the division?
Uh, Sorry?
Win the division?
I think they won the
Okay.
division, to be honest.
Okay.
I think they're picking up speed again, and they're the top of the South right now. So yeah, I think they'll still make the playoffs, but I think that they will lose the playoffs, maybe in the first or second game. I think the first game, to be honest, they're not playing to the best of their ability like they used to,
And
and there
injuries too.
there's a lot of injuries as well. Tom, I think that by the end of the season, he will go back to being a free agent. I don't think he'll give the Bucks another year. He needs an offense. And the Patriots have that offense. He needs wide receivers. The Patriots do have those wide receivers, and they got the running backs. They need a tight end to be able to run in the backfield, and they need a running back to run in the backfield as well. And the Patriots have that. What they don't have is a good quarterback to pick up the slack. And Brady already has the experience with the Patriots, and he has the ability as a quarterback to make that happen. He also has incentive of going back to the Patriots because I'm assuming he's looking for closure. And that would be the best place. He's always wanted to retire with the Patriots. I don't think that dream has changed. So I think we're going to see him next year. but I wonder if that'll be the last year. Um,
Mm.
and I really do think it'll be the last year. But I think at that point, from a character perspective, it'll be too late. His family has already been lost. He's made it pretty clear, even though it's not something he wants to be true, that football is probably more important than his family.
Mm.
But so, from a gospel standpoint, I really, really hope that it goes beyond football and hits his heart the right way. But otherwise, I like him as a player. I love him as a player, and I have liked him as a character off the field. But like I said, lately, as far as a fan is concerned, and again, my fandom comes from both on the field and off the field. Off the field, he's lacking, and I think that the prediction there will be it's up in the air, unfortunately, because only God knows what his salvation and his soul will look like. But it will show whatever that choice, whatever that prediction might be, whatever that future holds for him. It'll show in his decisions with his family, and it'll show in his decisions on the field and off the field. Yeah.
Gotcha. Well, and I kind of want to tag this on there for a application piece in the way of anyone listening. I think a really good thing, couple previous episodes talking about what drew us into football, choices we've made when it's come to fandom of football, when it's come to other things in life, as well as even faith, is the understanding you are in control of your own choice. You have no control over the choice that someone like Tom Brady makes. You have no control over the choice that I make, that Aaron makes. And so when it comes to these conversations about something like family and work balance, when it comes to salvation, when it comes to being saved, when being saved from sin, from death, those kind of things that we're talking about with the good news earlier, um, ultimately the choice is up to you, the individual, for your individual life. You have to make that decision. I can't do anything. Our prayer, like he said, obviously, yeah, our prayer is that somebody even like a Tom Brady would even like a Tom Brady, like he's some evil, sinister person, but would be that he would come to know Christ. Like that's the ultimate. And man, the fulfillment you find in the things that you do when you come out of the hope of Christ anyway, like I feel like you'd find so much more fulfillment in something like football when you come out of when you come at it
Yes.
out of Christ rather than out of yourself. Because oh my goodness, because what you do is for so much more. Anyway,
Yeah.
but so really really dwell on these things. I encourage you to think on these things. It's your choice. I can't force you to think on these things, but I would encourage you process for yourself. You can't force this upon anyone else. I can't force Aaron to understand that Tom Brady's not the GOAT. And I'm just kidding.
Now we're praying for your soul that you.
Oh man, what a crazy thing it would be if we ended up there one day and God's just like to either one on either side, just like, listen, you were wrong about the GOAT thing. See ya. What? It was
No.
that trivial? No, just kidding. It's not gonna be that.
Right.
But anyway, so brother, I appreciate you being on today. To everybody listening, thank you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed the time and conversation we've got to have, both football related, and life related. Deeper conversations, deeper thoughts that the couch always provides. I know neither of us are sitting on a couch right now as I talk about that. One day, I hope to get the setup there. But with that being said, I hope to catch everybody in the next episode. Going to be having more guests on in the future. I look forward to the plethora of conversations that can come up in each and every one. It's different with each and every person. That's the beauty of it. And I hope to have everyone back listening again on the next episode. Until then, peace.